Hello learners. Today we are going to learn about some real life examples of Newton's second law of motion. First example, pushing a car and a truck. Newton's second law of motion can be observed by comparing the acceleration produced in a car and a truck after applying an equal magnitude of force to both. It is easy to notice that after pushing a car and a truck with the same intensity, the car accelerates more than the truck. This is because the mass of the car is less than the mass of the truck. See these people pushing this truck. It's going to be much harder to push this truck than it is to push the car because the truck has less mass and less acceleration than the car. See these boys pushing this car. It's going to be easier to push the car because the car has less mass than the truck. Second example is pushing a shopping cart. Pushing an empty shopping cart is easier than pushing a loaded shopping cart. This is because of relation of the mass of the object, the force applied to it, the acceleration produced. Since mass has an inverse relationship with the acceleration, the loaded cart tends to move at a slower pace than the empty cart. The third example, two people walking together. Consider two people having different masses walking together due to the inverse relationship between the mass and acceleration. The person having more mass tend to move slower and the person having less mass tend to move faster. This scenario justifies Newton's second law of motion in real life by establishing a relationship between mass and acceleration and force. The fourth example, hitting a ball. A ball develops a certain amount of acceleration after being hit. The acceleration with which the ball moves is directly proportional to the force applied to it. This means that the harder you hit the ball, the faster it will move, thereby demonstrating Newton's second law of motion in daily life. The fifth example is rocket launch. For a rocket to leave the Earth's orbit and enter outer space, a force called thrust is required. As per the second law of motion given by Sir Isaac Newton, the force is proportional to the acceleration. Therefore, to launch a rocket, the magnitude of thrust is increased, which in turns increase the acceleration. The speed achieved by the rocket finally helps it to escape the Earth's gravitational field and enter the space. The sixth example is car crash. During a car crash, there exists a force between the obstacle and the car, which is known as the impact force. The magnitude of the impact force depends on the mass of the object involved in the collision and the speed with which the object moves. This means that the greater be the mass of the objects involved in the collision, the more will be the intensity of the impact force. Similarly, the more will be the acceleration with which the car moves. The greater will be the magnitude of the impact force. The seventh example is object thrown from a height. When an object is thrown from a certain height, the gravitational pull of the earth helps it to develop acceleration. The acceleration increases the object advanced towards the earth. According to Newton's second law of motion, the acceleration developed by a body is directly proportional to the force. When the object hits the ground, the impact force comes into action. This is the reason why brittle object thrown from a tall building suffers more deformity than the situation where the same object is thrown from a comparatively shorter building. Example 8. Karate player breaking the slab of bricks. A karate player makes use of the second law of motion to perform the task of breaking a slab of bricks. Since, according to law, the force is proportional to the acceleration, the player tends to move his or her hands over the slab of the bricks swiftly. This helps him to gain acceleration and produce a proportionate amount of force. The force is sufficient enough to break the bricks. The ninth example is driving a car. In simple terms, Newton's second law of motion states that if force is applied to any object, that has mass, it will result in the production of an equivalent amount of acceleration in the object. For instance, when we turn on the ignition system of the car, the engine of the car produces sufficient force that enables the car to move with proportionate acceleration. The 10th example is racing car. While designing a racing car, the ultimate tendency of the engineers stick to reduce the mass of the vehicle. This is because according to Newton's second law of motion, the mass of an object is inversely associated with acceleration. By reducing the mass of the racing car, the acceleration can be increased considerably, thereby increasing the chance to win the race. These are the 10 real life examples of Newton's second law of motion. Thank you so much.